The gunshot echoed across Blackstone Ridge just as Eleanor Vance collapsed in the snow, her hand bleeding through torn fabric while flames devoured the southern ridge behind her. Coulter Hayes had 30 seconds to choose: save his herd or save the woman who'd walked into his life 3 months ago and turned everything upside down. A woman his men still called worthless. A woman he'd sworn never to need. But as her eyes met his through the smoke, he realized the truth. Losing her would destroy him worse than losing everything else ever had. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The wind that morning carried the smell of dying things. Coulter Hayes stood on the sagging porch of Blackstone Ridge Ranch headquarters, coffee gone cold in his tin cup, watching March snow bury what was left of his father's dream. 38 years old, and he looked 50. Lines carved deep around eyes that hadn't softened in half a decade, the kind of face that made smart people keep their distance. Behind him, the ranch house groaned against wind that had been battering these mountains since before Montana had a name. Paint peeled from wood that should have been replaced 2 winters back. Shutters hung crooked. The whole operation looked like what it was, something barely hanging on. "Boss?" Coulter didn't turn. He knew Rake's voice, knew that careful tone men used when they had bad news, but weren't sure if delivering it might get them fired. "Spit it out. Chuck's quittin'. Says he can get work down in Billings that don't involve freezing his ass off for burnt beans and coffee that tastes like dirt. He ain't wrong about the coffee. You gonna try to keep him?" Coulter finally looked at his foreman. Rake Wilson was 43, weathered as old leather, loyal as they came. Also honest enough to tell Coulter the truth nobody else would say out loud. "You think I should?" Rake shifted his weight, glanced toward the bunkhouse where smoke barely trickled from a crooked chimney. "I think if we lose another hand, we ain't gonna make it through Calvin season. I think we're already short on everything that matters. And I think—" He stopped. "Say it." "I think this place is dying, and you're letting it happen because you stopped giving a damn about anything years ago." Most bosses would have knocked a man flat for words like that. Coulter just took another sip of terrible coffee and watched the snow fall. "Anything else?" "Yeah." Rake pointed toward the main gate, barely visible through the storm. "There's someone coming up the road, on foot." "In this weather?" "Been watching them for about 10 minutes now, moving slow but steady." Coulter squinted into the white. Eventually he made out a dark shape trudging through knee-deep snow, still half a mile from the gate. Nobody walked these mountains in March. Nobody's sane anyway. "Probably lost." "Maybe." Rake didn't sound convinced. "Want me to ride down?" "Let 'em come. If they're stupid enough to walk through a blizzard, they're either desperate or crazy. Either way, I want to see which." It took another 20 minutes for the figure to reach the gate. By then, Coulter had pulled on his coat and walked down from the house, Rake beside him. 4 other hands had drifted over from the bunkhouse, curious despite the cold. The stranger was a woman. That was the first surprise. The second was that she wasn't young. 40-something, maybe older. Hard to tell under all the weather damage. Heavy-set in a way that spoke of rural poverty rather than comfortable living. Face red from cold and exertion, dark hair plastered to her head under a wool cap that had seen better decades. Her coat was patched in 3 places. Boots wrapped with wire where the soles had separated. She stopped at the closed gate and looked at the 6 men staring at her. "This Blackstone Ridge Ranch?" Her voice was rough but steady. Eastern accent, maybe Pennsylvania or Ohio. Definitely not from anywhere near Montana. "Depends on who's asking," Coulter said. "Eleanor Vance." She shifted the small pack on her shoulder. Everything she owned, from the looks of it. "Heard in town you might need a cook." Behind Coulter, someone laughed. He didn't turn to see who. "You heard wrong. We got a cook. You got a man who burns beans and makes coffee from old grounds used 3 times over," Eleanor said. "I can do better." "That's so." Coulter studied her with the same expression he used evaluating livestock. Cold, measuring. Most women would have flinched or looked away. Eleanor Vance held his stare without blinking. "Where you coming from?" "Walked from Turner's Spread. Before that, tried the Morrison place. Before that, 3 other ranches whose names I didn't bother learning after they turned me down." "So 5 outfits passed on you already, and you figured we'd be desperate enough to say yes?" "Figured you'd be smart enough to at least hear me out before deciding." One of the hands, a kid named Danny who'd been with the outfit 6 months, snorted. "Lady, no offense, but you look about ready to collapse. How you gonna cook for 8 men when you can barely walk through some snow?" Eleanor's eyes shifted to him. "I walked 4 hours through a blizzard to get here after 4 other bosses told me I was too old, too fat, or too ugly to work on their ranches. I got frostbite on 3 toes, and my right hand's got no feeling left in the fingers. But I'm standing here talking to you instead of laying down to die in a ditch somewhere. So you tell me, kid, you think I can't handle a kitchen?" Silence. Coulter felt something move in his chest, some small shift he hadn't experienced in years. Respect, maybe? Or just recognition of someone as stubborn and beaten down as he was. "Gates open," he said, turning back toward the house. "Bunkhouse is that building there. Kitchen's in worse shape than you'd expect, which is saying something. You can sleep in the room off the pantry if you can clear enough junk out to fit a bedroll. Pays $30 a month plus room and board." "40, Eleanor said. Coulter stopped walking. Rake sucked in air through his teeth. The other hands looked at each other with expressions that said this woman had just committed suicide. Coulter turned around slowly. "Say that again?" $40 a month. You're paying below market rate because you know desperate people got no leverage. But you need someone who can actually cook. And I need a job that pays enough to maybe save something for when I'm too old to work. So I'm worth 40, and we both know it. I could send you back into that storm right now." "You could. But then tomorrow you're still eating burnt beans and yesterday's coffee, and I'm still looking for work. Only difference is I'll be dead, and you'll be exactly where you are now, which based on the look of this place, ain't good." For 5 long seconds, nobody breathed. Then Coulter did something he hadn't done in recent memory. He almost smiled. 40. But you're feeding breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 8 men who eat like they're storing up for winter. You're responsible for the kitchen, the stores, and keep an inventory of what we got left. You slack off even once, you're done. Clear? Clear. Good. Get inside before you lose that hand completely. Eleanor hefted her pack and walked through the gate, past 6 men who watched her like she was a puzzle they couldn't quite figure out. As she passed Rake, the old foreman tipped his hat slightly. "Ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel 100 years old. What should we call you?" "Eleanor works fine. Or cook, if you're feeling formal." She disappeared into the ranch house without looking back. Danny waited until she was out of earshot. "Boss, you really gonna pay her $40 to burn food same as Pete does for 30? "Pete quit this morning," Rake said quietly. "Forgot to mention that part." "Still, she's—" Danny seemed to be searching for words that wouldn't get him in trouble. "She ain't exactly what I pictured when I heard we might be getting a new cook." Coulter turned on him with eyes gone flat and dangerous. "What did you picture, exactly?" "I just meant— You meant she's too old, too heavy, too worn out looking to be worth a damn. That about right?" Danny's face went red. "I didn't— Let me tell you something about worth," Coulter said, voice quiet enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. "That woman just walked 4 hours through weather that's killed better men than you. She stood at this gate after 5 ranches rejected her and still had the backbone to negotiate wages with me. So before you decide she ain't worth your respect, ask yourself if you'd have the guts to do what she just did." He walked away without waiting for an answer. Rake watched him go, then looked at the assembled hands. "You heard the man. We got a new cook, and anybody who's got a problem with that can pack their gear and walk back down the same road she came up. Questions?" There were no questions. Inside, Eleanor stood in the middle of what might generously be called a kitchen if you squinted and had low standards. Grease covered every surface. Pots and pans lay in haphazard piles, most of them crusted with food from meals past. The stove looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned since the previous century. A thin layer of mouse droppings covered the counter near the flour sacks. The room off the pantry, her new quarters, was worse. Boxes of junk stacked to the ceiling, broken furniture, old tack, what might have been a raccoon's nest in one corner. Eleanor set down her pack and looked at the disaster she had just negotiated $40 a month to manage. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the hands came in for dinner, they expected the same slop they'd been choking down for months. Maybe worse, given the new cook looked half dead when she arrived. Instead, they found the kitchen transformed. Not perfect. You couldn't undo years of neglect in 6 hours, but cleaner than any of them had seen it. The stove actually gleamed in spots. Counters were scrubbed. The worst of the grease was gone, and the smell of cooking food had replaced the stench of rot and mouse piss. Eleanor stood at the stove, hair tied back, face flushed from heat and work. In front of her, a pot of stew bubbled next to a pan of fresh cornbread. "Sit," she said, not looking up. They sat. She served them bowls of stew thick with vegetables and chunks of actual meat, then cut generous slabs of cornbread still hot from the oven. Fresh coffee, real coffee, not the burnt dirt they'd been drinking, steamed in their cups. Nobody spoke. They just ate, and for the first time in months, some of them actually tasted their food instead of just shoveling it down to fill the emptiness. Coulter came in last, took his place at the head of the table, and stared at his bowl like it might be a trick. "Where'd you get the vegetables?" he asked finally. Eleanor was already cleaning the stove, working grease off the surface with strong, steady movements despite her injured hand. "Found half a bag of potatoes in the pantry that hadn't rotted yet. Carrots were in better shape. Onions needed some trimming, but they were usable. Meat? Salt pork from the stores. Not much left, by the way. You're damn near out of everything." "I know. Do you?" She turned to face him, and there was no deference in her expression. "Because from what I can tell, you've been letting this place fall apart one piece at a time without doing a damn thing to stop it." Every man at the table froze. You didn't talk to Coulter Hayes like that. Not if you valued your job. Hell, not if you valued your teeth. But Coulter just took another bite of stew, chewed slowly, and swallowed. "This tastes like something my mother used to make." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "Your mother teach you to cook?" "Tried to. I wasn't much good at it." He paused, something shifting behind his eyes. "She died when I was 17. Fever took her in 3 days. My father never recovered. Spent the next 15 years working himself into the ground, trying to forget." "And you?" I followed his example. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of men eating and the pop of wood in the stove. "Well," Eleanor said eventually, turning back to her cleaning, "grief's a heavy thing to carry, but starving yourself and everyone around you ain't gonna make it lighter." Someone, Rake probably, made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been choking on cornbread. Hard to tell. Coulter finished his stew in silence, then stood and brought his bowl to the wash basin. He stood there a moment, close enough to Eleanor that she could probably feel the heat from him in the cold kitchen. "Thank you," he said quietly. She glanced up, surprised. "For what?" "For dinner. For—" He seemed to struggle with the words. "For not giving up at the gate." "Didn't have anywhere else to go," Eleanor said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Running out of places that'll have me." "Their loss." He walked out before she could respond. Eleanor stood at the wash basin, hands in cooling water, and allowed herself one long breath. Then she went back to scrubbing. Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm developed. Eleanor rose before dawn to get the stove going and breakfast ready. The hands ate actual food for the first time in memory. Eggs when they had them, flapjacks, oatmeal with brown sugar she managed to stretch from the dwindling stores, coffee that didn't taste like punishment. During the day while the men worked, she attacked the years of accumulated filth. She scrubbed the bunkhouse until hardened cowboys complained it smelled too clean. She organized the pantry, took inventory, and presented Coulter with a list of supplies they'd need when the weather cleared enough to make a town run. She found the chicken coop, or what was left of it, and spent 3 days rebuilding the structure with salvaged wood and stubbornness. By the end of the week, she had 4 chickens producing eggs again. The men mocked her at first. "Look at her," Danny would say, not quite quiet enough. "Thinks she's going to fix this place all by herself." "Probably kill herself trying," another hand added. "Woman her age shouldn't be working that hard." But their mockery lost steam as the ranch slowly transformed around them. As their meals improved, as the coffee got better, the small comforts they'd forgotten about returned one by one. And Eleanor ignored every word anyway, too busy fixing the next broken thing to care what they said behind her back. Then the blizzard hit. It started as a distant line of darkness on the northern horizon, the kind of storm system that made smart people check their supplies and pray. By nightfall, wind screamed across Blackstone Ridge hard enough to rattle windows and tear shingles from roofs. The snow came horizontal, Within 12 hours, drifts buried the fences. Within 24, the ranch was completely cut off from the outside world. No supplies coming in. No way out except on foot, and even that would be suicide. Coulter called everyone into the main house to take stock. "We got maybe 2 weeks of food if we're careful," Eleanor reported, standing at the pantry door with her inventory list. "Less if this storm keeps up and we burn through firewood faster." "Coffee?" Rake asked. 4 pounds. We'll need to ration it." Groans from the assembled cowboys. Coffee wasn't just a luxury out here. It was medicine, ritual, the thing that kept men going through 18-hour days and killing cold. "What about the herd?" Coulter asked. "South Pastures got some shelter from that ridge line," Rake said. "But if this keeps up more than a few days, we're going to lose calves. Maybe worse. We'll do what we can. Priority is keeping everyone alive and fed. Eleanor, you're in charge of rationing. Anyone gives you trouble, send them to me." Eleanor nodded. "One more thing." "What?" "We got mice in the stores, maybe rats. Been leaving poison, but they're eating through our supplies faster than the storm." "How bad?" "Bad enough I found droppings in the flour this morning. Had to throw out 10 pounds. Coulter's jaw tightened. 10 pounds of flour might as well be gold right now. "Set more traps. Do what you have to do." The storm lasted 8 days. 8 days of howling wind and snow that fell so thick you couldn't see the bunkhouse from the main house. 8 days of shrinking rations and tempers stretched thin as wire. The men started turning on each other. Small arguments became fights. Someone accused someone else of stealing extra coffee. Rake had to physically separate 2 hands who came to blows over a card game. And some of them turned on Eleanor. "This is her fault," Danny said one night in the bunkhouse, voice low but not low enough. "We were doing fine before she showed up." "We were starving before she showed up," Rake corrected. "We had enough. Now she's rationing everything like we're about to die, and all that work she's been doing, fixing the coop, cleaning things, that's just wasting energy, wasting supplies." "You're an idiot," another hand said flatly. "She's the only reason we ain't already out of food. Or maybe she's the reason we're worried about it in the first place. Putting ideas in the boss's head, acting like she owns this place. That's enough." Coulter stood in the doorway, snow still on his shoulders from checking the herd. Every man in the bunkhouse suddenly found something else to look at. "Danny, you got something to say about how this ranch is run?" "No, boss. I was just questioning whether the woman who's kept you fed for 2 weeks knows what she's doing." "That it?" Danny's face went red. "I didn't mean... You ever been through a real winter storm, son? One that lasted weeks instead of days? One where people actually died because they ran out of food or heat or hope?" "No, but I have. Lost 3 hands in the winter of '84. Found one of them frozen in a drift 50 yards from the bunkhouse. He'd gone out for firewood and got turned around in the snow. Died within sight of safety because we didn't have systems in place. Didn't have discipline. Didn't have someone smart enough to make us ration and plan and think past the next meal." He let that sink in. "Eleanor's doing what needs done. And if any man here's got a problem with that, you can walk out into that storm right now and see how far your pride gets you. Otherwise, shut the hell up and be grateful someone around here's got the sense your mama should have beat into you." Silence. Coulter turned and walked back out into the blizzard. On the 8th day, the storm finally broke. Dawn came clear and brutally cold, sunlight reflecting off snow so bright it hurt to look at. Drifts stood 8 feet tall in places. The world had been remade in white, and it would be days before the ranch could dig itself out. But they'd survived. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, taking stock of what was left. 2 pounds of coffee, maybe 5 days of food if they stretched it. Not good, but enough to make it until someone could get through to town. She was so focused on counting that she didn't hear Coulter come in behind her. "How bad?" She jumped, turned. He stood in the doorway looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. "Bad enough. We'll make it, but it's going to be tight." "You did good. Just did what needed doing." "No." He stepped into the kitchen, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You kept these men alive. Kept them fed. Kept them from tearing each other apart when they got scared. That ain't just what needed doing. That's leadership." Eleanor felt heat creep up her neck. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from men like Coulter Hayes. "You're the boss. You're the one who..." I'm the one who was ready to let this place die, he interrupted. You're the one who wouldn't let it. They stood there in the early morning quiet, and something passed between them that neither one knew how to name yet. I should check on the chickens, Eleanor said finally, breaking eye contact. See if they made it through. Eleanor? She stopped at the door. Thank you. She nodded without turning around and walked out into the snow. Coulter stood alone in the kitchen she'd transformed, breathing in the smell of coffee and fresh bread, and realized with something approaching fear that he'd started looking forward to seeing her every morning, that he'd started needing her, and that terrified him more than any storm ever could. The day after the blizzard broke, Rake took 2 men and fought through drifts to check the south herd. They came back 3 hours later with bad news. Lost 12 calves, Rake reported, standing in Coulter's office while melting snow puddled around his boots. Could have been worse, but that ridgeline saved most of them. Still, we got maybe 20 head scattered in the ravines. Gonna take days to round them up. Do it. Take whoever you need. There's something else. Coulter looked up from the ledger he'd been staring at without seeing. What? Found tracks? Wolf tracks? Big ones. Looks like a pack moved in during the storm, probably driven down from higher elevations. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Coulter closed the ledger. Wolves meant lost livestock. Lost livestock meant lost money they didn't have. Set watches on the herds. Anyone sees a wolf, shoot it. Already done. Just wanted you to know we got another problem on top of everything else. Story of this goddamn ranch. Rake almost smiled. Yes, sir. But we're still standing. After he left, Coulter sat in the silence of his office and tried to remember when things hadn't felt like they were constantly falling apart. Tried to remember when he'd felt something other than tired. He couldn't. Eleanor found him there an hour later, brought him coffee without asking if he wanted it. Heard about the wolves, she said, setting the cup on his desk. Bad news travels fast. Always does. She hesitated, then pulled up the chair across from him, the one nobody else dared sit in. You gonna make it? The ranch? Probably not, but we'll drag it out another season or 2 before it finally dies. I meant you. He looked at her then, really looked, at the woman who'd walked through a blizzard to get here, who'd worked herself half to death fixing things other people had given up on, who somehow saw through all his armor to the truth underneath. I don't know, he said honestly. Eleanor nodded like she'd expected that answer. Well, when you figure it out, let me know. Meanwhile, I need to know if you want stew or beans for dinner. You choose. Stew it is. She stood, started for the door, then paused. Coulter? Yeah? You're carrying too much alone. Gonna break you eventually if you don't let someone help. She left before he could respond. Coulter sat there holding coffee gone cold, staring at the ledger that showed a ranch bleeding money it didn't have, and wondered when the last time was that anyone had cared enough to tell him the truth. Outside, spring was trying to break through the snow. Inside, something else was starting to thaw. And Coulter Hayes, who'd spent 5 years making sure he never needed anyone, was beginning to realize he might not have a choice anymore. The wolves came 3 nights later. Eleanor heard the cattle first, that particular sound of panicked animals sensing predators. She was already out of bed, pulling on her boots in the dark, when the gunshots started echoing across the south pasture. By the time she got outside, half the ranch hands were mounted and riding hard toward the noise. Coulter was already gone, rifle in hand, disappeared into darkness broken only by a half moon struggling through clouds. Stay inside, Rake told her as he swung onto his horse. Like hell. Eleanor? Those men are going to be out there all night. Someone's got to have hot food and coffee ready when they come back frozen and exhausted. That someone's me. Rake looked like he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. Keep the doors locked anyway. She watched them ride out, then went back inside to stoke the fire and start preparing. No point trying to sleep now. The men returned in waves over the next 4 hours. First came Danny and another hand, both shaking from cold and adrenaline, reporting they'd driven the pack north but lost sight of them in the timber. Then 2 more. One with a gash across his arm where he'd caught it on barbed wire in the dark. Eleanor cleaned and wrapped it without comment while he cursed steadily under his breath. Coulter and Rake came back last, just before dawn, both covered in mud and exhausted enough they could barely dismount. How many head? Eleanor asked, meeting them at the barn with hot coffee. 2 calves, Coulter said, his voice flat in that way that meant he was holding back fury. Could have been worse. Probably will be if that pack settles in the area. You hit any of them? Rake got one. Rest scattered. He took the coffee, drank it without seeming to taste it. We'll set watches from now on. Can't afford to lose any more. Eleanor watched him walk toward the house, shoulders tight with exhaustion and something else. Defeat, maybe. The kind that came from fighting too many battles with too few resources. He's going to work himself to death, she said quietly. Rake, standing beside her, didn't disagree. Been trying to do exactly that for 5 years now. You're the first thing that slowed him down even a little. I'm not trying to slow him down, I'm trying to keep him fed. Same thing, maybe. Rake finished his own coffee. He tell you about his wife? Eleanor shook her head. Figured. He don't talk about it. But you should know, she died 6 winters back. Pneumonia turned bad. Storm hit same time she got sick, and by the time it cleared enough to get a doctor up here, she'd been gone 3 days. He paused. Coulter blames himself, thinks if he'd been smarter, richer, better prepared, he could have saved her. That's not how pneumonia works. Try telling him that. He's been punishing himself ever since, working harder, caring less, pushing everyone away so he don't have to risk losing anyone again. Rake looked at her directly. Until you showed up and didn't give him a choice about it. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. I didn't come here to fix anyone. I came here because I needed a job. Maybe. But you're fixing him anyway, whether you mean to or not. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the pre-dawn cold with an empty coffee pot and a weight she hadn't asked for pressing against her chest. The next week blurred into exhausting routine. The men rode out before sunrise and came back after dark, trying to round up scattered cattle while keeping watch for wolves. Eleanor kept the kitchen running, the coffee hot, the meals ready whenever someone stumbled in, hungry and half frozen. She also kept working on the ranch itself. The chicken coop was producing 6 eggs a day now. She'd found an old root cellar that, with some cleaning and repair, could store vegetables if they ever had any to store. The bunkhouse laundry, which had been piling up for months, got washed and hung to dry in mountain wind that left everything smelling like pine and snow. The men stopped mocking her. Some of them even started saying thank you. But the work was taking its toll. Eleanor's hands, already damaged from frostbite that first day, developed cracks that wouldn't heal. Her back ached constantly from hauling water and firewood. At night she collapsed into her narrow bed, too tired to even undress properly, and woke before dawn to do it all again. She never complained. Complaining was for people who had other options. On the 8th day after the wolf attack, she was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Coulter came in looking worse than she'd seen him yet. You eat today? She asked without looking up. Not hungry. That wasn't the question. He slumped into a chair at the table, and she could hear the exhaustion in the way he moved. No, haven't eaten. Eleanor wiped flour from her hands and started assembling food. Leftover stew from last night, heated on the stove. Fresh bread from this morning. Coffee that was still mostly hot. She set it in front of him. Eat. Eleanor, eat, or I'm going to stand here and watch you until you do. And I got bread that's going to overproof if I don't get back to it. Your choice. He almost smiled. Then he picked up the spoon and started eating mechanically, like his body was going through motions his mind had checked out of. Eleanor went back to her bread, but she watched him from the corner of her eye. Watched the way his hands shook slightly, the way his jaw was clenched even while he chewed, the way he looked like a man holding himself together through sheer stubbornness. How bad's the herd? She asked. Down 18 head total. Could have been worse, but we can't afford it either way. He pushed the empty bowl away. And we got another storm coming in tomorrow. Rake says it's going to be bad. How bad? Bad enough we need to bring the cattle in closer, which means rebuilding fences in the north pasture we tore down 2 years ago because we didn't have enough hands to maintain them, which means... He stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. Doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. When's the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I don't remember. That's not sustainable. Nothing about this ranch is sustainable, Coulter said, and there was something raw in his voice. We're bleeding money, bleeding livestock. Every season gets harder and we got less to work with. I look at the books and I know I know, we probably got 2 years left before the bank takes it all. So no, Eleanor, nothing about this is sustainable. But it's what I got, and I'm going to fight for it until there's nothing left to fight for. The kitchen was quiet except for the pop of wood in the stove. Eleanor shaped her dough into loaves, hands working from muscle memory while her mind worked through something else. Then she turned to face him. You know what I see when I look at this ranch? A sinking ship. A place that's still standing when it's got every reason not to be. A man who hasn't given up even though it'd be easier. Hands that stick around even when the pay's terrible and the work's worse, because they believe in something here worth fighting for. She crossed her arms. You think you're losing, but you're still in the fight. That counts for more than you think. Coulter looked at her for a long moment. You really believe that? I walked 4 hours through a blizzard to get here after 5 ranches told me I wasn't worth their time. I'm still here. So yeah, I believe it. Something shifted in his expression, some small crack in the armor he kept wrapped around himself. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not giving up on this place. He seemed to struggle with the words. For not giving up on me. Before Eleanor could respond, the kitchen door slammed open and Danny burst in, face white with panic. Boss, it's old Pete. He's bad. Real bad. They found the old ranch hand in his bunk, shaking with fever so high his skin burned to the touch. His breathing came in short, labored gasps, and when Eleanor checked his eyes, the whites had gone yellow. How long's he been like this? She demanded. Don't know, Danny said. He didn't come to dinner, but we figured he was just tired. Found him like this 10 minutes ago. Coulter was already moving. We need to get him to a doctor. Nearest doctor's in town, Rake said from the doorway. That's a 6-hour ride in good weather. Storm coming in tonight? We'd never make it. Then we bring the doctor here. Coulter. Eleanor's voice cut through the rising panic. Look at him. He's not going to last 6 hours, much less 12 while someone rides for a doctor and back. So what do you suggest? We just let him die? I suggest we do what we can right here. I've nursed fever before. It ain't pretty, and I can't promise anything, but it's better than watching him slip away while we argue about things we can't change. For a moment she thought Coulter might argue. Then he nodded sharply. Tell me what you need. What followed was 3 days of hell. Eleanor sat up beside Pete's bunk and barely left. She forced water down him when he could swallow, broth when he couldn't. She cooled his fever with wet cloths that had to be changed every 20 minutes. When he thrashed and tried to throw off the blankets, she held him down with strength that surprised even her. The other hands kept their distance, afraid of catching whatever Pete had. But Coulter came by twice a day, bringing fresh water and taking away soiled cloths, his face carefully blank. On the second night, Pete's fever spiked so high, Eleanor thought he might actually die. His breathing went shallow and ragged. His pulse became thready and weak. Come on, you stubborn old bastard, Eleanor muttered, wringing out another cloth. You don't get to quit on me now. You hear me? You don't get to quit. She didn't notice Coulter standing in the doorway watching. You should rest, he said quietly. Eleanor didn't look up. Can't. Fever breaks in the next few hours, or it doesn't break at all. You've been up for 2 days straight. I've been up longer. She placed the cool cloth on Pete's forehead, checked his pulse again. Still weak, but maybe, not quite as thready as before. Go away, Coulter. I got work to do. Why? She looked up then, exhausted and irritated. Why what? Why are you doing this? Pete's not family. Hell, he barely talks to you. Most of these men treated you like dirt when you first got here. So why are you killing yourself to save one of them? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, hands still working, changing the cloth, checking Pete's breathing. When I was younger, she said finally, I worked at a factory in Philadelphia. There was this girl there. Couldn't have been more than 14, lied about her age to get the job. One day the machine caught her hand. Tore it up bad. Everyone just stood there staring, afraid to help because they didn't want trouble with the foreman. She paused, wrung out another cloth. So I helped her, got her hand wrapped, got her to a doctor, got her home safe. Foreman fired me for it. Said I was causing disruptions. That girl's mother came to see me after. Thanked me. Asked why I'd done it when I knew it had cost me my job. What'd you tell her? Told her 'cause someone had to. Because when you got the ability to help and you choose not to, you're just as responsible for what happens as if you'd caused it yourself. She finally looked at Coulter. So that's why. Not because I like Pete or because anyone's going to thank me, but because I can help. And that means I should. Simple as that. Coulter nodded slowly. Then he pulled up a chair and sat down beside her. Tell me what to do. What? You've been up for 2 days. You need rest or you're going to collapse. So tell me what to do, and I'll watch him while you sleep. Coulter, that wasn't a request. Tell me. So she did. Showed him how to check Pete's pulse, how to keep the fever down with cool cloths, what signs to watch for that meant things were getting worse. Then, reluctantly, she lay down on the empty bunk across from Pete's and closed her eyes. She was asleep in 30 seconds. Coulter kept watch through the night, changing cloths and checking breathing and trying not to think about another night 6 years ago when he'd done the same thing for someone he loved, and it hadn't been enough. When dawn broke gray and cold through the bunkhouse windows, Pete's fever finally broke. Eleanor woke to find Coulter slumped in the chair beside Pete's bunk, asleep sitting up, and Pete breathing easier than he had in days. She stood quietly, checked Pete's forehead, cool, or at least cooler, and his pulse, which had steadied into something approaching normal. He was going to live. She looked at Coulter, still sleeping, face exhausted even in rest, and felt something shift inside her chest, something dangerous and complicated that she had no business feeling. Quietly, she went back to the kitchen to start breakfast. When Pete was strong enough to sit up and drink broth on his own, the other hand started treating Eleanor differently. The mockery stopped completely. Some of them even looked embarrassed when they talked to her, like they were remembering every snide comment they'd made about her age or appearance. Danny was the first to apologize. He found her in the kitchen one morning, hat literally in his hands, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Ma'am, Eleanor, I wanted to say I'm sorry for the things I said when you first got here, about you not being able to handle the work and other stuff. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Eleanor looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. You were scared. Scared people say stupid things. I know, 'cause I've been scared most of my life, and I've said plenty of stupid things myself. Still, wasn't right. No, it wasn't. But you're apologizing now, which is more than most people do. So apology accepted. Now get out of my kitchen before you track more mud on my clean floor. He grinned, relieved, and backed out. The others followed over the next few days. Some apologized outright. Some just started being more respectful. All of them seemed to look at her differently now, not as the desperate woman who'd stumbled into camp, but as someone who'd earned her place through work and grit. Eleanor tried not to care. Caring about what people thought had never done her any good. But late at night in her small room off the kitchen, she'd lie awake and feel something unfamiliar warming in her chest. Belonging, maybe. Or the beginning of it. The storm rake had predicted hit 2 days later, and it made the first blizzard look gentle by comparison. Wind shrieked across the mountains hard enough to shake the buildings. Snow fell so thick it was like trying to breathe underwater. The temperature dropped so low that water left in buckets froze solid in minutes. This time they were prepared. Food was rationed but adequate. Firewood was stacked high. The cattle had been brought in as close as possible, and the hands took shifts watching them in rotating teams so nobody stayed out in the killing cold too long. But even preparation couldn't stop everything. On the third day, part of the barn roof collapsed under the weight of snow. On the fourth, they found 3 more calves dead from the cold. On the fifth, the main well started showing signs of freezing over, which would have been catastrophic if Rake hadn't caught it early and kept it clear. Eleanor worked through it all, maintaining routines that kept everyone sane. Breakfast at dawn, coffee always hot. Dinner ready when the men stumbled in from watch shifts, frozen and exhausted. She worked despite her hands, which had cracked so badly they bled when she kneaded dough. Despite her back, which screamed in protest every time she lifted the heavy water buckets. Despite exhaustion that made her stumble sometimes when she thought no one was watching. Coulter noticed. He started showing up in the kitchen at odd hours, taking over tasks without asking, hauling water for her, splitting firewood. Once she found him scrubbing pots at the wash basin while she was supposed to be resting. "That's my job," she said from the doorway. "You were asleep. Figured you needed it more than these pots needed to sit dirty." "I can do my own work." "I know you can. Doesn't mean you have to. He kept scrubbing, not looking at her. You've been keeping everyone else going. Someone's got to keep you going too. Eleanor felt that dangerous warmth in her chest again, stronger this time. Why do you care? Coulter was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough she almost didn't hear it over the wind outside. Because somewhere along the way, you became important, and I don't let important things fall apart if I can help it. He finished the pots, dried his hands, and walked out before she could figure out how to respond. On the 7th day of the storm, Eleanor was checking supplies in the pantry when her vision suddenly grayed at the edges. She grabbed for the shelf to steady herself, missed, and went down hard on the wooden floor. She was trying to push herself back up when Coulter found her. Eleanor, he was beside her instantly, hands careful on her shoulders. What happened? Nothing, just got dizzy for a second. When's the last time you ate? She tried to remember and couldn't. This morning, I think. It's 4 in the afternoon. Then this morning. I'm fine, Coulter, just let me... But when she tried to stand, her legs wouldn't cooperate. Coulter caught her before she fell again, and the next thing she knew, he was carrying her out of the pantry like she weighed nothing. Put me down! I got work. Your work is done for today. He set her in a chair at the kitchen table, then started assembling food with the efficiency of someone who'd been watching her do it for weeks. Bread, butter, leftover stew, coffee. Eat, he said, pushing the plate toward her. I need to start dinner. Rake can handle dinner. Eat. The look on his face said arguing would be pointless. Eleanor picked up the spoon and started eating, and once she started, she realized how hungry she actually was. When had she last eaten a full meal instead of picking at scraps while she cooked? Coulter watched her until the plate was empty, then refilled her coffee without asking. You keep working like this, you're going to collapse, he said quietly. I'm fine. You passed out. I got dizzy. There's a difference. Not much of one. He sat across from her and his expression was harder than usual. You can't take care of everyone if you don't take care of yourself. That's not heroic, it's just stupid. Eleanor felt anger flare. Don't lecture me about taking care of myself when you've been working 18-hour days for weeks, and I've seen you skip more meals than I have. That's different. Ist's all sui das. How? Because you're the boss? Because you're a man? Or because you think you're the only one allowed to work yourself to death around here? They glared at each other across the table. Then, unexpectedly, Coulter laughed. It was short and rusty, like he'd forgotten how, but it was real. We're both idiots, aren't we? Despite herself, Eleanor felt her anger drain away. Yeah, pretty much. So maybe we should both try harder, take care of ourselves so we can take care of this place. Maybe. She finished her coffee, felt strength returning with the food and warmth. But I'm still doing dinner. You're resting for another hour first. Rake can start the prep. Coulter, not negotiable. You collapsed in my kitchen, which means I'm responsible for making sure you don't do it again. So you're sitting here for 1 hour, drinking coffee and doing nothing. And if you argue with me, I'm going to have Rake lock you in your room. Eleanor studied him, this hard man who was trying so badly to take care of her without admitting that's what he was doing. 1 hour, she agreed. But then I'm working and you can't stop me. Fair enough. He stood, started for the door, then paused. Eleanor, thank you for everything you've done. For this place, for the men, for... He seemed to struggle with the words. For reminding me what it feels like to have someone worth coming home to. He left before she could respond, and Eleanor sat alone in the warm kitchen, crying for the first time since she'd arrived at Blackstone Ridge Ranch. Not from sadness, from something bigger and more terrifying than that. From hope. The storm finally broke on the 9th day, leaving behind a world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, and a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching dawn paint the mountains pink and gold, coffee steaming in her hands, and allowed herself one moment to just breathe. Behind her, the kitchen was already warm and filled with the smell of baking bread. In an hour, the men would stumble in for breakfast, exhausted from night watch, but alive. In an hour, the work would start again, digging out, checking the herd, repairing damage. But right now, for just this moment, everything was quiet. Pretty, ain't it? She turned to find Coulter standing in the doorway, looking almost as tired as she felt, but somehow lighter than he had in weeks. Yeah, almost makes you forget how much it wants to kill you. He smiled slightly and came to stand beside her, close enough their shoulders almost touched. That's the mountain for you, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Eleanor was acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from him in the cold morning air, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he held his own coffee cup with hands that were scarred and calloused from years of hard work. "Spring's comin'," Coulter said eventually. "Another few weeks and this'll all melt. We'll be able to get a wagon to town, restock supplies. If we make it another few weeks, we will. We got this far." Eleanor glanced at him. "You sound almost optimistic. That's new." "Yeah, well," he took a sip of coffee. "Someone told me I should stop acting like everything's already lost. Figured I'd try taking her advice." Before Eleanor could respond, Rake appeared around the corner of the bunkhouse, moving fast enough to send alarm shooting through her. "Boss, we got trouble!" Coulter was already moving. "What kind?" "Cattle scattered in the south ravines. Looks like wolves hit 'em during the night. We got maybe 15-20 head down in terrain too rough to reach easy." "How rough?" "Real rough. Steep walls, loose rock, snowdrifts 10 feet deep in places. We're going to need ropes and at least 4 men to get down there safe." Coulter swore under his breath. "Get Danny, Miguel, and whoever else is ready to ride. I want everyone armed in case those wolves are still around." "Yes, sir." Rake hesitated. "Boss, that ravine, it's dangerous even in good conditions. With all this new snow..." "I know. But we can't afford to lose that many head. We go careful, we go smart, but we go now before we lose more." Rake nodded and took off at a jog. Coulter turned back to Eleanor, already shifting into the hard, focused version of himself she'd come to recognize. "Keep breakfast warm. This is going to take most of the day. Be careful down there." "Always am." He started to walk away, then stopped and looked back at her. "Eleanor, if something happens, don't." She cut him off, something cold gripping her chest. "Don't talk like that. You go do what needs doing and you come back safe. That's all I want to hear." For a moment she thought he might argue. Then he nodded once and headed for the barn. Eleanor watched him go, that cold feeling spreading through her entire body. She'd survived enough hard years to know when someone was walking into danger, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to stop him. But she didn't. Because this was ranch life, and danger was part of the deal, and all she could do was wait and hope. She hated waiting. The men rode out an hour later, 6 of them armed with rifles and ropes, and Eleanor threw herself into work to keep from thinking about what could go wrong. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganized the pantry for the 3rd time, started prep for a dinner she wouldn't serve for hours. Around noon, Pete shuffled into the kitchen, still weak but mobile. He'd been recovering slowly, spending most of his time resting, but today he looked restless. "Need something to do," he announced. "Going crazy just laying around." Eleanor pointed at the pile of potatoes. "Peel those. And sit down while you do it. You're still too weak to be on your feet long." He grumbled but complied, settling into a chair with a knife and bowl. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Pete spoke up. "You saved my life." "You're welcome." "No, I mean..." He paused, searching for words. "I wasn't always the nicest to you when you first showed up. Said some things I shouldn't have. And you still sat beside me for 3 days keeping me alive when you could have just let me go." Eleanor kept her hands moving, slicing carrots with practiced efficiency. "Already told Coulter why I did it. Same answer applies to you. Still, I'm sorry for being a jackass." "Apology accepted. Now peel faster. We got 8 hungry men coming back tonight, and those potatoes aren't going to cook themselves." Pete smiled slightly and went back to work. But after a few minutes, he spoke again, quieter this time. "Boss is different around you. You notice that?" Eleanor's knife stilled. "Different how?" "Less angry, less, I don't know, buried, I guess. Like he's been digging himself a grave for years and you're pulling him back out whether he wants it or not." "That's dramatic." "Maybe, but it's true." Pete set down a finished potato and reached for another. His wife, Mary, she was good people. Gentle, kind, exactly the sort of woman you'd expect a man like Coulter to fall for. When she died, Something in him died too. He stopped believing in anything good, stopped hoping, just worked and worked like if he stayed busy enough, he wouldn't have to feel nothing. Eleanor resumed cutting, trying to ignore the ache spreading through her chest. Then you show up, Pete continued, and suddenly he's eating regular meals, sleeping more than 4 hours, laughing once in a while. He don't even realize it's happening, but everyone else sees it clear as day. Pete, I ain't saying this to make you uncomfortable. Just want you to know, whatever's growing between you two, it's a good thing. Don't run from it 'cause you're scared. Eleanor set down her knife and looked at him directly. What makes you think I'm scared? 'Cause I got eyes. I see how you look at him when you think nobody's watching, and I see how you pull back every time he gets too close, like you're waiting for this whole thing to fall apart. That's because things always fall apart. That's what they do. Not always. Sometimes things come together instead, but you gotta let them. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of horses echoed from outside. She was moving before she consciously decided to, out the door and into the yard where the men were dismounting. Coulter swung down from his horse, covered in mud and snow, but apparently intact. Eleanor felt relief hit her so hard she had to grab the porch railing to steady herself. How bad? She asked. She seat. Bad enough. Lost 2 head we couldn't reach, too far down and the ledge gave way when we tried. Saved the rest, but it took all day and Miguel's got a sprained wrist from a rope burn. I'll wrap it after dinner. Everyone else okay? Yeah, tired and half frozen, but okay. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You were worried. It wasn't a question. Of course I was worried. You went into a damn ravine in the snow, Shishi. We do dangerous things every day out here. Why was today different? Because I'm terrified of losing you, Eleanor wanted to say. Because somewhere along the way you became important, and I don't know how to handle that. But she couldn't say any of that. Not here, not now, maybe not ever. Just get inside and warm up, she said instead. Dinner's almost ready. She turned and walked back into the kitchen before he could see her face, before he could read all the things she was trying so hard not to feel. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Eleanor sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, staring at nothing and trying to sort through the mess inside her head. She'd spent her whole adult life moving. One job to the next, one town to the next, never staying long enough to put down roots because roots meant attachment, and attachment meant pain when things inevitably fell apart. It was easier to stay alone, safer. But Blackstone Ridge was different. These people were different. Coulter was different, and that terrified her more than any blizzard or wolf pack ever could. Thought I'd find you here. She looked up to find Coulter standing in the doorway, still fully dressed despite the late hour. Couldn't sleep, she said. Me neither. He came into the kitchen, poured himself coffee from the pot she always kept warm, and sat across from her. You want to tell me what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Eleanor, I've spent enough time around you to know when you're lying. Something's been eating at you all evening. What is it? She stared into her tea, watching steam curl up in the lamplight. When you were down in that ravine today, all I could think about was what if something happened to you? What if you fell or got hurt or... She stopped, swallowed hard. And I realized I cared way more than I should, than I have any right to. Coulter was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Why shouldn't you care? Because I'm just the cook. Because I've only been here a few months. Because... She finally looked at him. Because caring about people means losing them eventually, and I've lost enough already. So you figure it's better to never care at all? It's safer. Maybe, but safe ain't the same as alive. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You think I don't know about loss? I buried my wife 6 years ago, watched her die slow while I couldn't do a damn thing to help. And yeah, it nearly destroyed me. But you know what would have destroyed me more? Never having her at all. Never knowing what it felt like to love someone that much. Eleanor felt tears threatening and forced them back. I'm not her, Coulter. I'm not young or pretty or gentle or any of the things a man like you should want. You're right. You're not her. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her scarred knuckles. You're stubborn and sharp-tongued, and you work yourself half to death out of pure spite. You walked through a blizzard when anyone sensible would have given up. You saved a man's life because it was the right thing to do, even though he'd treated you like dirt. You turned this place from something dying into something that feels like home again. He paused, his grip on her hand tightening. So no, you're not Mary, but maybe that's exactly what I need. Someone strong enough to survive this life. Someone who don't break easy. Someone who... His voice roughened. Someone who makes me want to be better than I've been. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Coulter, I'm falling for you, Eleanor. Maybe already fallen, I don't know. And I know that scares you. Hell, it scares me too. But I'm done pretending I don't feel it. Done acting like you're just the cook when you're so much more than that. The kitchen was silent except for the tick of the clock and the pop of embers in the stove. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd just laid himself bare, and felt every wall she'd built come crashing down. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in. Neither do I. Not anymore. He stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. But maybe we can figure it out together. Eleanor looked up into his face, at the scars and lines and years of hard living written there, and saw something she'd stopped believing existed. She saw home. Okay, she breathed. Okay. Coulter's expression softened into something that might have been relief or joy or both. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or practiced or anything like the kisses Eleanor had imagined in her younger years. It was rough and uncertain and tasted like coffee and hope. And it was perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Coulter rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said quietly. Not just for the job. Stay because you want to. I already am, Eleanor said, and realized it was true. She'd stopped running the day she walked through that gate. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of melting snow and cautious optimism. Spring was coming slowly, fighting its way through the last gasps of winter, and with it came a shift in the ranch's atmosphere. The men noticed the change between Coulter and Eleanor immediately, though nobody said anything directly. They just started giving the two of them space when they were together, exchanging knowing looks when Coulter found excuses to be in the kitchen, smiling when Eleanor's face softened whenever he walked into a room. Rake finally cornered Eleanor one morning while she was feeding the chickens. You're good for him, he said without preamble. Eleanor scattered grain, watching the hens peck at it. Don't know about that. I do. Been riding with Coulter for 15 years, and I ain't seen him this close to happy since before Mary died. That's your doing. He's good for me too, Eleanor admitted quietly. Gave me a reason to stop running. Then I guess you're good for each other. Rake tipped his hat. Just don't hurt him. He acts tough, but that man's been hurt enough for one lifetime. Same goes for you. He hurts me. You'll answer for it. Rake actually smiled. Yes, ma'am. But their fragile peace couldn't last. It never did out here. The fire started on a Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor was in the root cellar checking supplies when she smelled smoke. Not the familiar wood smoke from the stove, but something sharper and wrong. She climbed the ladder fast and emerged to find the southern sky dark with it. Rake was already shouting orders, men scrambling for horses and wet blankets. Eleanor ran to the bunkhouse and found Coulter strapping on his gun belt. How bad? She demanded. Bad. Travelers camped on the south ridge left their fire burning. Wind caught it, and now the whole ridge line's going up. If it jumps to the grassland, it'll hit the ranch in hours. What do you need me to do? Stay here. Keep the buildings wet. If the fire gets close, there's a creek bed half a mile north. Get there and stay there until we come for you. Like hell. Eleanor. He grabbed her shoulders, his face desperate. I need to know you're safe. I can't fight that fire if I'm worrying about you. Please. She wanted to argue. Every instinct said to fight beside him, not wait helplessly while he risked his life. But she saw the fear in his eyes and knew her arguing would only make it worse. Okay, I'll stay. But you come back, you hear me? You come back, or I'll never forgive you. He kissed her hard and fast. I'll come back. I promise. Then he was gone, riding south with the rest of the hands, and Eleanor was alone with smoke darkening the sky and fear clawing at her chest. She didn't waste time being scared. Fear was useless. Work was what mattered. She hauled every bucket she could find to the well and started filling them. Carried them to the house, the barn, the bunkhouse. Soaked blankets and hung them over the most vulnerable wooden walls. climbed onto roofs to beat out embers that drifted in on the wind like deadly snow. Her hands, already damaged, split open and bled. Her lungs burned from smoke. Her back screamed in protest with every bucket lifted, every ladder climbed. She didn't stop. Hours blurred together. The sky turned orange, then red. Ash fell like rain. The wind shifted and the smoke got so thick Eleanor had to tie a wet cloth over her face just to breathe. She could hear the fire now, a distant roar that sounded like a living thing coming to devour everything in its path. The heat intensified. Eleanor looked south and saw flames cresting the ridge, racing toward the ranch faster than any horse could run. She had minutes, maybe less. She should run. Should head for that creek bed Coulter mentioned and save herself. That would be the smart thing, the sensible thing. But Eleanor Vance had walked 4 hours through a blizzard to get here, had worked herself half to death making this place home, had fallen in love with a broken man and a dying ranch, and had started believing in second chances. She wasn't giving it up without a fight. She climbed back onto the roof with another bucket of water and kept working while the world burned around her. The wind shifted. Eleanor didn't see it happen, was too focused on dousing hot spots, but she felt it. The heat that had been pressing against her like a physical force suddenly eased. The roar of the fire changed pitch. The smoke started drifting east instead of north. She stopped, bucket in hand, and looked south. The flames had turned. The fire was racing east now, away from the ranch, driven by winds that had inexplicably changed direction at the last possible moment. They were safe. Eleanor sat down hard on the roof, bucket forgotten, and started laughing, or maybe crying. It was hard to tell through the smoke and exhaustion and relief so intense it hurt. She was still sitting there when the men returned an hour later, covered in soot and ash, exhausted but alive. Coulter saw her first, looked up at the woman sitting on his roof like some kind of avenging angel, and his expression went through about 6 emotions at once. He was off his horse and climbing the ladder before anyone else could move. "What the hell are you doing up here?" he demanded, but his voice shook. "Saving your ranch." Eleanor gestured at the soaked walls, the buckets everywhere, the wet blankets still draped over vulnerable spots. Someone had to. Coulter looked around at what she'd accomplished alone, then back at her. At her bleeding hands and soot-stained face and eyes that burned with something fiercer than any fire. "You could have died. So could you. Didn't stop you from riding into it. That's different, but..." "How?" "Because you're allowed to risk yourself for this place, but I'm not?" She stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "This is my home too, Coulter. My fight too. You don't get to protect me from it." For a moment he looked like he might argue. Then something in his face crumbled, and he pulled her against him, holding on like she might disappear if he let go. "I thought I lost you," he said into her hair. "Thought I'd come back and find you gone." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart hammer against her chest. "I'm not that easy to kill. Mountain couldn't do it. Fire couldn't do it. You're stuck with me." "Good, 'cause I ain't letting go." They stood there on the roof while the sun set through smoke-hazed sky. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the middle of nowhere and decided to hold on. Below them, the men started putting out the last hot spots and checking for damage. Above them, stars started appearing through the clearing smoke, and between them something shifted from possibility into certainty. This was real. This was happening. This was home. That night, after the men had eaten and gone to bed and the last embers had been checked and rechecked, Coulter found Eleanor sitting on the porch steps staring at nothing. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, probably wood for days, and ash covered everything like dirty snow. He sat down beside her without asking, close enough their shoulders touched. "You should be restin'," he said. "Should is a funny word. I should be a lot of things I'm not." "What's that supposed to mean?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, hands folded in her lap. Her fingers were wrapped in clean bandages now. Rake had insisted on treating them after she'd finally come down from the roof, but she could still feel the sting of split skin beneath the cloth. "I should be sensible," she said finally. "Should have run when you told me to. Should have saved myself instead of risking everything for a place I've only been at a few months. But I couldn't, and I don't know what that makes me. Makes you someone who fights for what matters to her. Or someone who's too stubborn to know when to quit." Coulter reached over and took her bandaged hand gently in his. "You ever gonna let yourself have something good without fighting it every step of the way?" "Probably not. Spent too many years waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hard to stop now. What if it don't drop? What if this is just... He seemed to struggle with the words. What if this is just good? And that's all it needs to be. Eleanor looked at him then, at this man who'd been as broken as her not so long ago, and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. I'm scared, Coulter. Scared of wanting this too much. Scared it'll get taken away like everything else has. I know. I'm scared too. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. But I'm more scared of losing you because I was too afraid to hold on, so I'm choosing to be scared and do it anyway. Do what? This. He shifted to face her more fully. Eleanor Vance, I love you. I love how stubborn you are and how hard you work and how you don't take shit from anyone, including me. I love that you walked through a blizzard to get here and then decided to stay. I love that you fought a fire alone to save this place because it became yours too. Eleanor's breath caught. Nobody had said those words to her in longer than she could remember. I'm not asking you to say it back, Coulter continued. Not pushing for anything you're not ready to give. Just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that when I say you're important, I mean you're everything. And if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time I got left making sure you never doubt that again. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, cutting tracks through the soot she hadn't quite washed off. I love you too, she said, voice breaking. Even though it terrifies me, even though I keep waiting for it to hurt. I love you, and I don't know what to do with that. How about you just feel it? Just for tonight. Don't fight it. Don't analyze it. Just let it be real. So she did. She leaned into him and let herself cry. For all the years of loneliness, for all the places that hadn't wanted her, for all the times she'd been told she wasn't enough. And then she cried for this, for finding something worth having when she'd stopped looking, for being loved by someone who saw all her sharp edges and wanted her anyway. Coulter held her through it all, one hand steady on her back, and didn't try to fix anything. Just let her feel. When she finally pulled back, eyes red and face blotchy, he wiped her tears with his thumb. You're beautiful, he said. Eleanor laughed wetly. Now I know you're lying. I look like hell. You look like someone who just saved my ranch, like someone who's stronger than she knows. Like the woman I love. He kissed her forehead. So yeah, beautiful. She kissed him then, properly, pouring everything she couldn't say into it. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the sky was starting to lighten with dawn. We should get some sleep, Coulter said, though he made no move to stand. Probably, but I don't want to move. Me neither. So they stayed there on the porch steps, holding each other while the sun came up over mountains that had tried to kill them and failed, and felt something neither of them had felt in years. Peace. The next week brought a different kind of storm. A rider came up from town with news that the railroad was pushing through the valley. They'd be reaching the area within months, bringing commerce and change and opportunity. Several ranches were already making deals to supply beef to railroad crews. Others were selling out entirely, taking the money and heading for easier country. Coulter called a meeting with his hands to discuss it. Way I see it, he said, standing at the head of the table while everyone listened, we got two choices. We can keep doing what we've been doing, scraping by season to season, hoping we don't lose everything in the next bad winter, or we can take a risk. What kind of risk? Rake asked. Railroad's going to need beef, a lot of it. They're offering contracts, guaranteed purchases at set prices for the next 3 years. Money's not great, but it's steady, reliable. What's the catch? Danny wanted to know. Catch is we got to expand, double our herd, maybe triple it, which means hiring more hands, building more infrastructure, taking on debt we might not be able to pay back if things go wrong. The room was quiet. Everyone knew what he was really saying. This could save the ranch or sink it completely. There was no middle ground. What do you think we should do, boss? Pete asked. Coulter glanced at Eleanor, who was standing by the stove listening. She raised an eyebrow, silently telling him this was his decision to make. I think, he said slowly, that we been surviving for too long. Just getting by, waiting for the end. And I'm tired of it. I say we take the risk. We expand, we grow, we build something that lasts, or we go down swinging instead of just fading away. I'm in, Rake said immediately. Me too, Pete added. One by one, every hand at the table voiced agreement. These men had stuck with Blackstone Ridge through the worst of times. They weren't about to quit now. All right then, Coulter looked around the table. We got work to do. After everyone dispersed, Eleanor approached him. You didn't mention the other option, she said quietly. What other option? Making me a partner, splitting ownership. Coulter went still. How'd you know I was thinking about that? Because I've been watching you chew on something for days, and it's the only thing that makes sense. You're expanding, which means you need capital you don't got, which means you're thinking about either taking on a business partner or, she paused, or making the woman who's been keeping this place alive a partner instead of just hired help. You own half of everything, half the land, half the herd, half the debt, equal say in every decision. That's crazy. Is it? You've worked as hard as anyone to keep this place going. You've earned it. Eleanor shook her head. Coulter, I showed up here broke and desperate. You gave me a job when nobody else would. Now you're offering me half of everything? That don't make sense. Makes perfect sense to me. You're not just the cook anymore, Eleanor. You haven't been for a while now. He struggled to find the words. You're the heart of this place, the thing that made it worth saving. And if we're going to build something that lasts, I want to build it with you, as partners, as equals. She stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Not just ownership, but recognition, respect, a future built together instead of him doing her a favor. What if I mess it up, she asked. What if I make the wrong call and we lose everything? Then we lose it together, but at least we tried. He took her hands. I trust you, Eleanor. Trust your judgment, trust your work, trust your heart. So yeah, I'm offering you half of a ranch that might not exist in 5 years, but I'm also offering you a home that's as much yours as it is mine. Question is, you want it? Eleanor looked around the kitchen she'd scrubbed and organized and made functional again. Thought about the chickens she'd nursed back to health, the men she'd fed and cared for, the fires and storms and wolves she'd survived. Thought about the man standing in front of her, offering her something she'd never dared dream of. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I want it. Coulter's face broke into a smile that transformed him completely. Good. Because I already had the papers drawn up. You what? Had 'em done last week, just been waiting for the right time to ask. He pulled folded documents from his pocket. We signed these, it's official. Eleanor Vance, equal partner in Blackstone Ridge Ranch. She took the papers with shaking hands, read through them carefully. It was all there. 50% ownership, equal decision-making authority, her name right next to his on everything that mattered. Where do I sign? They signed the papers that afternoon at the kitchen table, with Rake and Pete as witnesses. It wasn't fancy or formal, just 4 people scratching their names on legal documents while coffee cooled in their cups. But when it was done, Eleanor Vance owned half of something real for the first time in her life. Congratulations, partner, Coulter said, shaking her hand formally, before pulling her into a kiss that made Rake cough pointedly, and Pete suddenly find something interesting to look at out the window. The expansion happened fast after that. They hired 4 new hands, including 2 younger men fresh from Colorado who were willing to work cheap in exchange for learning the trade. They built new fencing in the north pasture and repaired the south line that had been neglected for years. They negotiated their first railroad contract, 300 head of cattle delivered over the next 6 months at guaranteed prices. It was exhausting, expensive, and terrifying. Every decision felt like it could make or break them. But for the first time, Coulter wasn't making those decisions alone. What do you think? He'd ask Eleanor, going over the books late at night. Can we afford another hand or should we wait? We need the help now, not in 3 months when we're already behind. Hire someone. Or, railroad wants delivery in August. That's cutting it tight with Calvin's season. Then we push Calvin earlier. Start now instead of waiting for May. They argued sometimes. Eleanor wanted to invest in better equipment while Coulter thought they should save the capital. Coulter wanted to expand faster while Eleanor urged caution. But they always talked it through, always found middle ground, always decided together. The ranch changed. New faces appeared. The bunkhouse got an addition to house the extra hands. The kitchen expanded too. Eleanor couldn't feed 10 men from the same setup that barely handled 8. Equipment got replaced. Systems got improved. Slowly, Blackstone Ridge started looking less like a dying operation and more like a real business. But success brought new tensions. One of the new hires, a man named Carter from Wyoming, didn't take kindly to taking orders from a woman. He never said it directly, but Eleanor could see it in the way he looked at her. The way he'd nod when Coulter gave instructions but question everything when she did. It came to a head 3 weeks after he'd started. Eleanor was organizing the supply run to town, going over the list with the assembled hands, when Carter interrupted. "We don't need half this stuff," he said, pointing at the paper. "You're wasting money on nonsense." "The nonsense you're referring to is medical supplies and extra rope. Both things we ran out of last month." "Your last month, maybe. I've been ranching 15 years and never needed—" "Then you've been doing it wrong." Eleanor's voice went flat and cold. "We got 10 men working terrain that can kill you 6 different ways before breakfast. We keep proper supplies or people die. Simple as that. Maybe if people weren't so careless, you questioning how I run this operation, Carter?" The kitchen went dead silent. Every man there knew that tone, knew what came next if Carter didn't back down. "Just saying there's better ways to do things," Carter said, but there was challenge in his voice. "Ways that don't involve—" "Involve what? A woman making decisions? Say it plain if you're going to say it." Carter's face went red. "I didn't mean—" "Yeah, you did. You meant exactly that." Eleanor stepped closer to him and, despite being half his size, somehow made him take a step back. "Let me make something real clear. I own half this ranch. That means when I give an order, it's not a suggestion. You got a problem with that? You can pack your gear and be gone by sundown. We clear?" "Boss said—" "Boss agrees with me. We're partners, which means we're equal. So when you disrespect me, you're disrespecting him too. Now answer the question. We clear?" Carter looked around for support and found none. Every other hand was either studying the floor or watching with expressions that said he'd better choose his next words carefully. "We're clear," he muttered. "Good. Now get back to work." After everyone filed out, Rake lingered. "Handled that well," he said. "Handled it, period. Don't know about well. Trust me, that needed saying and you said it right. Carter's good with cattle, but he's got old ideas about women. Either he'll learn or he'll leave. Hope he learns. We need the hands. We need good hands, not ones that cause problems." Rake hesitated. "You know the men respect you, right? Not 'cause Coulter made you partner, but 'cause you earned it. Even the ones who didn't think so at first." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks, Rake. Just speaking truth." That night she told Coulter about the confrontation. "Want me to fire him?" he asked immediately. "No. Want to see if he can learn. But I needed you to know in case it becomes a problem later." Coulter pulled her close. "You don't need my permission to handle things your way. That's what being a partner means." "I know, but it's still nice hearing it." They were sitting on the porch again. It had become their spot, the place they went to talk and think and just be together. Spring was in full force now, the mountains green with new growth, the air warm enough that Eleanor didn't need a coat. "You ever think about how different things are now?" Coulter asked. "Compared to what?" "Compared to 6 months ago, when you showed up at the gate looking half frozen and completely alone." Eleanor considered. "I think about it sometimes. How close I came to not stopping here. How I almost kept walking because I was sure you'd turn me away too." "What made you stop?" "Stubbornness, mostly. Figured I'd rather hear no one more time than wonder forever if I should have tried." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Coulter corrected. "What's the first?" "Deciding to stay. You could have left after that first storm, after the wolves, after any of the 100 hard things that happened. But you stayed, and that—" His voice roughened. "That changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over land that was now half hers, land she'd earned through sweat and blood and stubborn refusal to give up. "Coulter?" "Yeah?" "I want to marry you." He went completely still. "What?" Eleanor sat up to look at him directly. "I want to marry you. Not because I need to. Not because it makes business sense. Just because I love you, and I want everyone to know it. Want it to be official and real and permanent." "Eleanor, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But I'm tired of being afraid of wanting things. Tired of holding back just in case. So I'm asking, will you marry me?" Coulter stared at her for a long moment, and she watched emotions chase across his face. Surprise, joy, fear, hope. Then he started laughing. "What's funny?" Eleanor demanded, suddenly uncertain. "Nothing's funny. It's just—" He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks trying to figure out when to ask you the same damn question." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. Nothing fancy, but real gold, carefully chosen. Eleanor felt tears start again. "You were going to propose?" "Was working up the courage. Kept thinking it was too soon, you weren't ready. I was pushing too hard." He took her hand. "But yeah, I was going to ask you to marry me. Make this official. Build a life together that's about more than just surviving." "So is that a yes?" "That's a hell yes. On one condition." "What?" "I get to ask properly." He slid off the porch step and onto one knee, still holding her hand, looking up at her with eyes that held everything he felt. "Eleanor Vance, you're the strongest, stubbornest, most incredible woman I've ever met. You saved my ranch, saved my life, saved me from turning into something cold and dead. Will you marry me?" "Only if you marry me back." "Deal." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her while the sun set and somewhere in the distance cattle load and life went on the way it always did on Blackstone Ridge Ranch. Except now everything was different. They set the date for late June, after the spring work was done but before the real heat of summer set in. Nothing fancy, just a simple ceremony with the ranch hands as witnesses and a meal after in the newly expanded kitchen. Eleanor spent the weeks leading up to it trying not to panic. "What if I'm terrible at being married?" she asked Rake one morning while they were checking fence lines. "Pretty sure nobody's good at it right away. You just figure it out as you go." "What if we fight all the time?" "You already fight all the time. Just now you'll be married while doing it." "That's not helpful, Rake." He smiled. "You're going to be fine. Both of you are. Stop borrowing trouble." But the fear was real. Eleanor had spent so many years alone that she didn't know how to be anything else. What if she couldn't share space? What if Coulter realized she was too difficult, too damaged, too much work? The night before the wedding, she almost ran. She was in her room, the one off the kitchen that had been hers since day one, packing her few belongings to move them to the main house where she and Coulter would live together. And suddenly the walls felt too close, and her chest felt too tight, and every instinct screamed at her to leave while she still could. She was halfway to the door when Coulter appeared in it. "Thought I might find you here," he said quietly. "I was just—" She couldn't finish the lie. "Thinking about running?" She nodded, ashamed. Coulter came into the small room and sat on her narrow bed. "You know what Mary told me the night before we got married?" Eleanor shook her head. "She said she was terrified. Said she loved me, but she was scared of losing herself, of becoming just someone's wife instead of her own person. I told her marriage didn't have to be like that. Told her we'd figure out how to be together without losing who we were separately." "Did you?" "Yeah, we did. It wasn't always easy, but we managed." He looked at Eleanor directly. "And that's what we'll do too. You're not going to stop being Eleanor just because you're my wife. You're still a partner in this ranch, still your own person, still stubborn as hell and twice as strong." "What if it's not enough? What if I can't—" "Can't what? Can't be perfect?" "Eleanor, I don't want perfect. I want you, the real you, with all the fear and stubbornness and strength. That's who I'm marrying tomorrow, not some idea of who you should be." Eleanor felt the panic start to ease. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He stood and pulled her into his arms. "Now come on. You need sleep, and I need you to show up tomorrow so I don't look like an idiot standing at the altar alone." She laughed despite herself. "Okay. I'll be there." "Promise?" "Promise." The wedding was small and simple and exactly right. Eleanor wore a dress she'd bought in town. Nothing fancy, just blue cotton that fit well and made her feel like herself. Coulter wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair. They stood on the porch where they'd had so many conversations, surrounded by men who'd become family, and promised to love each other through whatever came next. Rake officiated, reading from a small book with surprising solemnity. Pete cried, though he'd deny it later. Danny and the other hand stood respectfully, hats in hands, witnessing something that mattered. When Rake said Coulter could kiss his bride, the assembled cowboys cheered loud enough to startle the chickens. The meal after was loud and joyful. Eleanor had cooked for days, preparing enough food to feed everyone with plenty left over. There was beef and potatoes and fresh bread and pie made from preserved berries. There was coffee, and for those who wanted it, whiskey that Pete had been saving for a special occasion. As the sun set and the celebration continued, Eleanor found herself standing slightly apart, watching Coulter laugh with Rake, watching the hands tell stories and argue good-naturedly, watching this life she'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. "You happy?" She turned to find Coulter beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He passed her one. "Yeah," she said, surprised to realize it was true. "Yeah, I really am." "Good, 'cause you're stuck with me now." "Stuck with you?" "Pretty sure you're the one stuck with me." "Guess we're stuck with each other then." He put his arm around her, and they stood together watching their people celebrate their marriage. And Eleanor felt something she'd spent 40 years searching for finally click into place. She was home. Not just in a place, but with a person. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself believe it might actually last. The first train came through the valley in August, its whistle echoing off the mountains like nothing those peaks had heard before. Eleanor and Coulter stood on a ridge overlooking the tracks, watching black smoke trail across a sky that had been empty of everything but clouds and birds since the world began. "Everything's going to change now," Eleanor said quietly. "Already has." Coulter's hand found hers. "Question is whether we change with it or get left behind." They'd spent the last 2 months preparing for this moment. The herd had been expanded, carefully, slowly, buying quality stock when they could afford it and raising what they couldn't. They'd hired 2 more hands and built additional corrals to handle the increased numbers. The railroad contract sat signed and sealed in Coulter's office, promising steady income for the next 3 years if they could deliver. It was everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked the ranch to achieve. And Eleanor was terrified it might not be enough. "What if we can't keep up?" she asked. "What if we promised more than we can deliver? Then we work harder, hire more people, figure it out." Coulter squeezed her hand. "We didn't come this far to fail now." The first delivery was scheduled for September. 300 head of cattle driven to the rail depot 15 miles south, loaded onto cars bound for mining camps in cities Eleanor had never seen. It represented more money than Blackstone Ridge had made in the previous 2 years combined. It also represented a test. Prove they could deliver quality beef on schedule, and the railroad would renew the contract. Maybe even expand it. Fail, and they'd be back to scraping by, except now they'd have debt and extra mouths to feed. No pressure. The drive started before dawn on a Tuesday that felt too much like every other day to be carrying so much weight. 10 men on horseback, moving 300 head of cattle across terrain that could kill you if you weren't careful, trying to make 15 miles before nightfall. Eleanor rode with them. Coulter had argued against it, said she was needed at the ranch, said the drive was dangerous, said a dozen things that all meant he was worried about her getting hurt. She'd ignored him completely and saddled her horse anyway. "I'm a partner," she'd said flatly, "which means when the ranch's future is riding on something, I'm there, end of discussion." He'd recognized that tone and wisely shut up. The drive was brutal. Cattle didn't want to move in any coordinated direction, constantly breaking off to investigate interesting grass or just being generally difficult because that's what cattle did. The weather was hot enough to bake you during the day and cold enough to freeze you at night. Dust got in everything, eyes, mouth, clothes, until Eleanor felt like she'd never be clean again. But they made it. 15 miles in just under 2 days, arriving at the rail depot with all 300 head accounted for and in good enough condition that the railroad inspector barely looked before approving the shipment. "Quality stock," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "Keep delivering like this and we'll be doing business a long time." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. They'd done it. First major test, passed. On the ride back, Coulter pulled his horse alongside hers. "You were right to come," he said. "I know. Don't gotta sound so smug about it." "I'm not smug. I'm just always right. There's a difference." He laughed, and the sound carried across empty grassland like a promise that maybe things were actually going to work out. But success brought complications nobody had anticipated. Within 2 months, Blackstone Ridge had become one of the most reliable suppliers to the railroad. Other ranchers started asking questions. How were they managing it when bigger operations were struggling? What was their secret? The secret was Eleanor, her organization, her planning, her refusal to accept anything less than excellent from everyone, including herself. But not everyone saw it that way. Heard Hayes brought in a woman partner, one rancher said at the depot during a delivery in October. His name was Morrison, owned a spread twice the size of Blackstone Ridge, and his tone made it clear what he thought of that decision. That true? It's true, Coulter said evenly. Eleanor's my wife and my business partner. Why? Just surprised is all. Most men I know wouldn't trust a woman with that kind of responsibility. No offense, plenty taken. And for your information, Eleanor's the reason we're delivering quality beef on schedule while you're showing up with half the numbers you promised and cattle that look like they've been starved. Morrison's face went red. Now you listen here. No, you listen. I don't care what you think about how I run my ranch or who I run it with. Results speak for themselves, and based on what I'm seeing, your results are shit compared to mine. He walked away before Morrison could respond, leaving the man sputtering with impotent rage. Eleanor, who'd been watching from near the cattle pens, approached Coulter with an expression somewhere between amused and exasperated. You really gotta pick fights with every rancher who looks at me sideways? Only the ones who deserve it. That's gonna be most of them, then. Good, they can all go to hell. Despite the occasional conflict, business boomed. By November, the railroad had approached them about increasing their contract. By December, they'd paid off half their debt. By the new year, Blackstone Ridge Ranch was employing 14 hands and turning profits that seemed impossible 6 months earlier. But growth had costs beyond just money. The ranch felt different now. Bigger. More impersonal. New hands came and went, learning the work and moving on to their own operations. The tight-knit group that had survived the blizzards and fires and wolves together was still there, but diluted by newcomers who didn't share that history. One night in January, Eleanor found herself alone in the kitchen, a rarity these days, and realized she missed the quiet. Missed when it was just her and Coulter and a handful of loyal men fighting to keep one failing ranch alive. This new version was successful, but it wasn't the same. You look tired. She turned to find Coulter in the doorway, still wearing his coat from checking the stock. Just thinking. About? About how different everything is. How we got what we wanted, but it don't feel quite how I expected. Coulter came into the kitchen and poured himself coffee from the pot that was always ready. You regret it? The expansion? The contract? All of it? No. Not regret exactly, just she struggled to name the feeling. We were barely surviving before, but at least I knew everyone's name, knew their stories. Now we got hands I barely recognize, and I'm so busy managing everything I don't have time to actually talk to anyone. So we slow down, hire a manager to handle some of the daily operations, make time for the things that matter. Can we afford that? Can we afford not to? He sat at the table, pulled her into the chair beside him. Eleanor, we built this to have a life worth living, not just to make money. If it's turning into something that makes us miserable, what's the point? She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling exhaustion seep into her bones. When did everything get so complicated? Probably around the time we decided to stop just surviving and start actually living. They hired a foreman named Thomas in February, a solid man in his 50s who'd managed cattle operations twice the size of Blackstone Ridge and was looking for something quieter in his final working years. He took over the day-to-day management of the hands and livestock, freeing up Eleanor and Coulter to focus on the bigger picture. It helped. The ranch ran smoother, and Eleanor finally had time to breathe again. But breathing gave her space to notice other things, like the fact that she was 42 years old and married to a man who already had one dead wife. Like the fact that her body was tired in ways that went beyond just hard work. Like the quiet, persistent fear that she'd waited too long to have anything resembling a normal life. She was in the chicken coop one morning when the realization hit her so hard she had to sit down on an overturned bucket. She'd never have children. It was too late for that. Had probably been too late even when she'd arrived here. And she'd never let herself think about it before. Had been too busy surviving to mourn things she couldn't have. But now, sitting in a chicken coop on a successful ranch beside a man who loved her, she finally had space to feel the loss of all the lives she'd never live, all the versions of herself that had died on the road to becoming this one. You all right? Rake stood in the doorway, concern evident on his weathered face. Fine. Just taking a break. Eleanor, I've known you long enough to know when you're lying, What's wrong? She didn't plan to tell him, didn't plan to tell anyone, but something about Rake's honest concern broke through her defenses. Just realizing some things come too late, no matter how hard you work for 'em. Rake was quiet for a moment, then came and sat on another bucket beside her. This about kids? She looked at him, startled. How'd you know? Saw the way you've been watching the Peterson family when they came through last week. The way you looked at their little girl. Recognized that expression. My wife had it for years before we finally accepted we weren't going to have any of our own. How'd you get past it? Honestly, we didn't, not completely. There's always going to be a small ache for the thing you can't have. But we found other ways to build a family. Took in my sister's kids when she died. Became the aunt and uncle to half the children in our town. Made a life that mattered even if it wasn't the life we'd imagined. Eleanor absorbed that. You think Coulter minds that I can't give him children? Did you ask him? No. Might want to. Man's got a right to his own feelings on the subject. Rake stood, brushed off his pants. But if you want my opinion, Coulter loves you for who you are, not what you might give him. And if you can't see that by now, you ain't been paying attention. He left her alone with the chickens and her thoughts. That night, she told Coulter everything. About the realization in the chicken coop, about the fear that she'd failed him somehow, about the grief for a life she'd never have. He listened without interrupting, one arm around her shoulders, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You know what I think about when I think about our future? He asked finally. What? I think about us sitting on this porch when we're old and gray, arguing about something stupid like we always do. I think about this ranch still standing, still thriving, because we built something that lasts. I think about all the people we helped along the way, the hands we hired when they had nothing, the families we fed during hard times, the life we made that mattered. He turned to look at her. I don't think about children we don't have. I think about the life we do have, and I'm grateful for every bit of it. You mean that? Eleanor, I lost my first wife when I was 32. Spent the next 6 years convincing myself I'd never feel anything again. Then you walked through a blizzard and reminded me what it meant to be alive. His voice roughened. So no, I don't mourn children that were never going to happen anyway. I celebrate the fact that I got you, and that's more than I ever thought I'd have again. She cried then, but they were good tears. Healing tears. The kind that washed away old pain and made room for something better. Spring came again, bringing with it changes nobody expected. The railroad expanded faster than anyone anticipated, bringing more people to the valley. A town sprang up near the depot. Just a few buildings at first, but growing every week. Businesses opened. Families moved in. The isolated frontier Eleanor had walked into was transforming into something civilized. Blackstone Ridge adapted. They started selling milk and eggs to the growing town. Eleanor's bread became so popular that people placed orders a week in advance. The ranch became a hub, a place where travelers could get a hot meal and reliable information about conditions in the mountains. And Eleanor became something she'd never expected to be. Respected. Not just tolerated or accepted, but genuinely respected. Women in town asked her advice about everything from cooking to business. Men who'd initially dismissed her now tipped their hats when she passed. Even Morrison, the rancher who'd questioned her partnership with Coulter, eventually came around after seeing their operation thrive. Guess I was wrong about you, he admitted grudgingly one day at the depot. Takes a strong woman to run a ranch like you do. Takes a strong woman to run anything, Eleanor corrected. Just took you a while to notice. By summer, Blackstone Ridge was operating at a level that would have seemed like fantasy 2 years earlier. The debt was paid off completely. The herd had tripled. They'd expanded into new territory, leasing grazing land to the north that opened up opportunities for even more growth. But success wasn't what Eleanor thought about when she lay awake at night. What she thought about was the day she'd walked through a blizzard with nowhere else to go. The way Coulter had looked at her that first morning, measuring and skeptical. The burnt beans and terrible coffee that had been her starting point. She thought about Pete nearly dying and her refusing to let him. About the fire that almost destroyed everything and the choice she'd made to stay and fight. About the moment Coulter had told her he loved her and she'd finally let herself believe it. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been, the desperate woman at the gate, the stubborn cook who wouldn't quit, the partner who'd earned her place, the wife who'd chosen to build something real. and she realized something fundamental. Home was never a place you found. It was something you built, one difficult choice at a time, with people who were willing to build it alongside you. One evening in late October, Eleanor and Coulter stood on their usual spot on the porch, watching the sun set over mountains that had tested them in every way possible and found them strong enough to survive. "You think about how different things could have been?" Coulter asked. "If you'd kept walking that day? If I'd turned you away?" "Sometimes, but only to remind myself how lucky I got." "Lucky?" He smiled slightly. "That what we're calling it?" "What would you call it?" "Stubborn, on both our parts." He pulled her closer. "I was too stubborn to give up on this ranch, and you were too stubborn to let me fail at it. Combined stubbornness saved us both." "That a scientific term? Combined stubbornness?" "Should be. Someone should write a paper on it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light fade and the first stars appear. Behind them, the kitchen glowed warm with lamplight. Voices drifted from the bunkhouse where the hands were finishing dinner. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. It was an ordinary moment on an ordinary evening. Nothing dramatic or life-changing. Just two people standing together at the end of another day, surrounded by the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. And that, Eleanor realized, was exactly the point. She'd spent 40 years searching for something perfect. The perfect job, the perfect place, the perfect life. And had been miserable because perfection didn't exist. What existed was this: hard work and difficult choices and stubborn refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier. What existed was showing up every day and doing the work that needed doing, whether that work was feeding chickens or fighting fires or learning how to let someone love you when you'd convinced yourself you weren't worth loving. What existed was the slow, unglamorous process of building something that mattered, one day at a time, with imperfect people in an imperfect world. "I love you," she said suddenly. Coulter looked at her, surprised. "I know, you tell me that." "No, I mean," she struggled to articulate it. "I love this, us, the ranch, the life we built. All of it, even the hard parts. Maybe especially the hard parts because they're what made it real." Understanding dawned in his expression. "Yeah, I love it too." "You think it'll last? What we got here?" "I think nothing lasts without work. But I think if we keep putting in that work, keep choosing each other every day, then yeah, it'll last." "Promise?" "I can't promise the ranch will always be here. Can't promise the weather won't turn, or the market won't crash, or 100 other things won't try to destroy what we built." He turned to face her fully. "But I can promise I'll fight for it. Fight for you, fight for us, fight for this life we made. Every single day, for as long as I'm alive." "That enough?" Eleanor thought about the scared woman who'd stood at the gate 2 years ago, thought about all the times she'd almost run, all the moments she'd had to choose between fear and hope. "Yeah," she said, "that's enough." November brought the first real snow, and with it, a kind of full-circle moment that made Eleanor laugh despite herself. A woman appeared at the gate, younger than Eleanor had been, but with the same desperate look, the same worn clothes and battered boots, the same expression that said she was at the end of her options, and this was her last chance. Eleanor met her at the gate, recognizing herself in every line of the woman's face. "Name's Sarah," the woman said, chin up despite obvious exhaustion. "Heard you might need help in the kitchen." "We got someone in the kitchen. Then barn work, chicken coop, anything. I'm a hard worker, and I won't cause trouble." Eleanor looked at this woman who could have been her 2 years ago and felt something shift in her chest. "Wages are $40 a month plus room and board," she said. "Works hard and the hours are long. You slack off even once, you're done. We clear?" Hope flared in Sarah's eyes. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." "See that you don't. Now get inside before you freeze." That night, Eleanor stood in the kitchen watching Sarah eat the same way she'd once eaten her first meal here, like someone who'd been hungry long enough to forget what full felt like. Coulter came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You gave her my speech," he murmured. "It's a good speech. Gets the point across." "She remind you of anyone?" "Yeah, someone who needed a chance and got lucky enough to find it." "Lucky," Coulter repeated, his tone amused. "There's that word again." Eleanor leaned back against him, watching Sarah finish her meal. You think she'll make it? I think if she's half as stubborn as you were, she'll be fine. And if she's not? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, same as we deal with everything else. Spring would come again, the ranch would keep growing, or it wouldn't. The railroad would expand, or it would fail. 100 things could go wrong, and probably some of them would. But standing in her kitchen with her husband's arms around her, watching a desperate woman get the same chance she'd gotten, Eleanor finally understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about avoiding pain or preventing loss or protecting yourself from every possible hurt. It was about showing up anyway. About choosing to build even when building was hard. About extending the same grace to others that you'd needed when you were at your lowest. It was about being stubborn enough to believe in second chances, brave enough to take them when they came, and strong enough to offer them to the next person who showed up desperate and alone, looking for a reason to stop running. Come on, Coulter said softly. Let's go to bed. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. They're all long days. Yeah, but they're our days, makes a difference. Eleanor took one last look at Sarah, at the past she recognized and the future she hoped for, then let Coulter lead her upstairs to the bedroom they shared. Outside, snow fell soft and steady, covering the mountains in white. Inside, the stove ticked as it cooled. The house settled into nighttime silence. And in the morning, it would all start again. The work, the challenges, the stubborn determination to build something that lasted. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Eleanor Vance Hayes, former desperate woman, current ranch owner, perpetual fighter, allowed herself to rest. She'd earned it, not through being perfect or lucky or anything except showing up every day and refusing to quit. And in the end, maybe that was the only thing that really mattered. Not where you started or what you'd lost along the way, but whether you had the courage to keep building when everything in you wanted to give up. Eleanor had that courage, had always had it, even when she didn't know. It had brought her here, to this mountain, to this life, to this man who loved her despite, or maybe because of, all her rough edges and stubborn pride. It had brought her home, and she was finally ready to stay.